I noticed his hand first, the way it moved beneath the napkin, fidgeting, unsure. Not the way someone absent-mindedly adjusts a fork or refolds a napkin. No, this was deliberate, careful, like hiding something shameful in plain sight. We hadn't said much since sitting down. Just the usual small talk about traffic and how chilly it had gotten. I nodded along, but my eyes stayed on that napkin. It barely shifted, but I could see the outline of his fingers, nervous, hesitant. And then, there it was. He slid his ring off like it itched, like it no longer belonged. I didn't gasp, didn't reach across the table. My heart didn't even break, not then. It just tilted, slightly, like a picture frame on the wall that no one had bumped but was suddenly crooked. He set the ring beside the bread basket without looking up. Just placed it there on the white linen, gold on white, shining under candlelight. Simple, silent. And for a second, it didn't even seem real, just a misplaced object, like someone had set down a coin or a token, something you don't carry with you when you no longer want to. I stared at it. At him. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. The candle flickered softly between us. The flame swayed with the slightest gust from the nearby vent, casting a shadow across the table. I could hear the faint clink of dishes from a nearby couple. I could smell the garlic butter on the rolls, but none of it registered. I just stared at his hand, bare now, lighter, free. My fingers curled in my lap, not from anger, just restraint. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I didn't want to speak and find out what I already knew. Instead, I stayed still, like a bird on a wire, not ready to fly, but no longer sure it wanted to stay. And in that quiet, as my eyes traced the shape of the gold band resting beside the bread, I felt it, the moment shifting. A hinge, something opening, or maybe something closing. Either way, I knew this wasn't just dinner. This was the beginning of something I hadn't prepared for. The napkin moved like it was hiding a secret. Just a twitch at first, barely anything, but I saw it. I always saw his hands first. Even when we were young, I used to say his fingers told the truth before his mouth ever did. He laughed at something I didn't quite catch, and I smiled, though I didn't feel like it. I was busy watching. Under that napkin, he was turning the ring. I could tell by the way his knuckle bent against the linen. Then, all at once, it stopped. He slid the ring off like it had never fit right. He didn't look at me, just set it gently beside the bread basket, gold against white, no clink, no drama, just soft, final metal. I froze, not outwardly. My face stayed where it always stayed, polite, soft around the eyes. But inside, I perched, balanced, holding, my breath like someone on the edge of a high ledge, unsure which way the wind would push. He reached for the butter. Talked about traffic, said something about how the town had added new stoplights. And I nodded, but I didn't hear a word. All I could see was that empty finger. That bare, familiar hand is suddenly foreign. It moved so casually, reaching for the salt like it didn't just unwrite years. That hand once brushed flour from my cheek, once tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. It once held me like I was breakable and precious. Now it moved like I was no one at all. I smiled, I think. Maybe out of habit, maybe out of fear. I wasn't sure which. but it stayed on my face, even as my stomach twisted. My throat felt tight. Not from tears, I didn't cry, but from the sheer effort of staying upright. He said something else. About the neighbor's new fence, I think, or maybe the dog across the street. His voice came and went like radio static, there, but not worth tuning into. My eyes stayed on the ring. It was still sitting there, still catching light. I wondered if anyone else could see it. He talked like everything was fine, like we were still two people who knew how to laugh together, but I heard none of it. His voice wasn't real anymore. It was wallpaper. Just something in the background. The real conversation was happening in silence, in the stretch between his ring and his hand. That's when I felt it. Not a break. Not a snap. Just a bend. A soft tilt inside my ribs, like they were learning a new shape. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a stranger I once loved. I wanted to ask, when did it happen? But I already knew the answer wouldn't come. I kept chewing, even though the food had lost all flavor. The pot roast sat untouched. Rosemary and garden carrots, his favorite. I made it with care, set the table, lit the candle he liked. But now it sat cooling beside me, the scent still warm in the air, but the warmth long gone from between us. Even chewing felt like betrayal, like pretending. I stared at the steam rising off the plate, watched it fade into nothing. I remember thinking, is this how something ends? Not with shouting, not with slamming doors, just with steam vanishing from dinner? Outside, the wind brushed past the window. A draft came in from the crack he never got around to fixing. I pulled my sleeves over my hands, not because I was cold, but because I suddenly couldn't remember what to do with them. He kept talking, kept pretending, about weather, about the boys, about how the mailman always comes late now. I nodded, smiled, but the food stayed where it was, and so did I. And that's when I realized I wasn't part of this conversation anymore. I was just playing along. Somewhere deep inside, I felt it, the story splitting. Not loud, not painful, just shifting. We weren't in the same chapter anymore. He said something about the neighbor's new mailbox. I said, "Oh, really?" even though I hadn't heard the question. My mind had drifted to the space between us, to the gold ring still sitting there, to the wine glass that had started to sweat, to the shadows curling into the corners of the room as the sun dipped below, the horizon. I wanted to say something, anything, but there was nothing left to say. No rage, no plea, just a slow sinking, like sand under your feet when the tide pulls back. I didn't cry, but something inside me bent, just a little, enough to feel it, enough to know I'd never sit at that table the same way again. The leaves made that gentle crunch underfoot that only October could manage. They were copper and crimson, scattered across the grass like forgotten confetti. The smell of wood smoke drifted in from a nearby fireplace, someone grilling hot dogs or burning brush, I wasn't sure. I stood by the folding table near the edge of the picnic crowd, pretending to admire the quilt display while sneaking glances at the man handing out slices of pie. He had kind eyes and warm hands. I learned that when he passed me a paper plate, topped with apple pie, the crust golden, the filling soft with cinnamon. "You look like someone who deserves the biggest slice," he said, smiling, but not flirtatiously, more like a secret, shared quietly. I laughed, caught off guard. I didn't know his name yet, but his voice settled into my chest like it already had a place there. The fork was plastic, the pie was a bit too sweet, but the way he looked at me while I chewed, like I was a story he was trying to remember, made it the best thing I'd tasted all day. I looked up, and he was still watching me, gently, patiently, like time wasn't in a hurry for either of us. "You're not from around here," I said, though I wasn't sure why. He nodded, "Just moved back. My mom made me come," said it was time to grow roots. The breeze pulled at the hem of my dress, the one Mama called my sunny day favorite. It had yellow flowers and a belt I'd cinched tighter than usual that morning, though I hadn't known why at the time. We sat together near the hay bales and listened to the choir kids rehearse. He offered me a second slice, and I teased, "Trying to fatten me up already." He just smiled and said, "Maybe I want to keep you around." I looked at the sunset behind him, all golden orange bleeding into a soft blue, and thought, maybe I want to stay. That day stayed with me, not because of the pie or the music, but because it was the first time I felt chosen. Not chased, not convinced, just quietly chosen. And when I remember the beginning of us, I don't remember fireworks. I remember the way his eyes looked at me over a paper plate and the way his hands, warm and sure, never seemed to flinch. He kissed the top of the syrup bottle like it was a living thing, just a small peck, before twisting the cap and pouring it over my pancakes. I laughed the first time I saw him do it. "You kiss your condiments now?" He shrugged. "Only the sweet ones." That was Harold. He didn't love grand gestures, he loved in teaspoons and seconds. He'd hum the theme to old westerns while tying his shoes. He always noticed when I wore the blue cardigan, his favorite one. "It brings out your eyes," he'd say, even when I hadn't slept well or my mascara smudged. Our kitchen was the size of a hallway. We couldn't open the fridge and the pantry at the same time without bumping elbows. But somehow, it was enough. More than enough. The tablecloth had strawberry stains from Sunday breakfasts, and the toaster made a sound like it was exhaling when the bread popped up. I remember one morning, the toast burned a little. I waved the smoke away with a towel and muttered, "Everything I touched today is going wrong." He walked up, took the toast off my plate, and said, "Then let me hold your hand instead." Just like that. We weren't rich in much, certainly not in square footage or new appliances, but the richness was in the way he never forgot to warm my coffee mug before pouring it in. He hummed, "You Are My Sunshine," when he thought I couldn't hear him. One morning, I found a note tucked inside the cereal box. "In case the day's hard, just know you're my favorite reason to get up." That was it. No flowers. Just a scribbled sentence in his half-crooked handwriting on the back of a shopping list. That's the kind of love he gave me. Quiet, steady. The kind of love that doesn't take up a whole room, but fills every corner of it, without needing to try. And I remember thinking, while buttering my toast that morning, this man is made of small miracles. When the draft letter came, it was a Thursday. I remember because I had just finished washing the curtains. He sat on the side, couch in silence, envelope open on his knee, eyes unreadable. I sat beside him, didn't ask anything. Just held his hand until he finally whispered, 3 months. He left in May, and from that day on, I wrote to him every third day. I bought envelopes in bulk, got a cramp in my wrist from writing on the bus, in the laundry room, on the back steps when the house felt too quiet. I filled every letter with updates, memories, recipes, and terrible jokes. I signed them all the same way. I'll be right here, always. One day, the paper ran out. I started tearing pages from old cookbooks. He got a letter about my fears scribbled next to a recipe for rhubarb pie. He told me later he liked those best. I waited for his letters like they were lifeboats. The mailman started recognizing my face. He'd just nod and hand me the bundle before I asked. Most days there wasn't anything from Harold, and I'd nod back, smile, and save the crying for later. Then one day in July, the envelope was thick. I thought maybe he'd sent pictures. But when I opened it, a bit of sand spilled into my lap. A tiny note tucked inside read, "A piece of where I miss you." Just that. I sat on the porch, barefoot on warm wood, watching the cicadas buzz around the oak tree. I held that envelope in my hands like it might break, and I cried. Not loud, not ugly, just soft and grateful and aching. The sand was still warm, from his hands. I kept that envelope in my dresser drawer for years. Still have it, and every time I held it, I remembered how far a person can feel, and how close love can reach. The morning felt like any other. Light crept in through the blinds and fell in strips across the kitchen floor. I stood at the sink, sponge in hand, scrubbing the same plate twice. The scent of yesterday's coffee lingered in the air, bitter and thin. I could hear Harold getting his keys from the bowl near the door. That familiar clink. Then the creak of the knob, but no kiss. No soft brush of his lips on my cheek. No, "Be back soon, sweetheart." Just the door closing. Just silence. I turned off the faucet and stood there, the dish still slick in my hands. It had been our ritual, his kiss before leaving, a sacred, simple thing. It used to be automatic, something I never thought to doubt. I pressed the sponge into the plate until it squeaked. Why didn't he kiss me? The clock on the stove blinked 7:03. I stood perfectly still for a moment, just listening to the low hum of the fridge and the faint bird song outside. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, just from the weight of something shifting, that. Single missed kiss echoed louder than any argument. I whispered to myself, maybe he was in a hurry, but it didn't feel honest. It felt like a line I was reading from an old script, one we'd both stopped believing in. The window above the sink fogged slightly from the steam. I reached up and wiped it clean with my sleeve. The sky outside was cloudless, and the sidewalk shimmered faintly with dew. But inside, the air felt heavy. I rinsed the plate again, even though it didn't need it, and I thought, when did silence become so loud? The garage door slammed shut again. That was the third time that week. I looked up from the laundry basket and watched from the kitchen window as Harold disappeared into that space like he was chasing something only he could hear. He used to come home and sigh like a man letting the day go. Now, his sighs landed heavy, sharp around the edges. He barely said hello anymore. I knocked gently on the doorframe. "Need help with anything?" He didn't answer. Just bent over the workbench, fiddling with something metal and loud. I stood there for a moment, watching his shoulders. They dropped, even when he was upright. Slumped like his whole frame had given up holding itself together. "Harold?" I asked again, softer, still nothing. I turned and walked back inside, rubbing the sleeve of my sweater between two fingers. The house smelled like lavender softener and reheated soup, but I could still catch the faint trace of sawdust through the back door. The lawnmower droned in the distance, someone else's Saturday chore getting done. But ours stayed undone. Everything stayed undone lately. He was tired. I told myself that. Everyone gets tired. But this wasn't the tiredness of too little sleep or long hours at work. This was tiring with teeth, the kind that bit quietly. The kind that took pieces of him and left me wondering what was left behind. I folded the towels slowly, methodically, trying not to let the worry sit too long in my chest. Where did he go when he was still standing in front of me? I used to joke that the garage was Harold's second home. Now it felt like it had swallowed him whole. He stayed out there for hours, fixing, adjusting, rearranging. Tools lined the walls in neat rows. Things that didn't need fixing still got taken apart. I'd call his name, sometimes just to hear it bounce back. Harold? Silence. Maybe the buzz of a drill, maybe a cough, but rarely an answer. I started going to bed alone more often. I'd leave the hall light on, fold back his side of the blanket, but he never came until late. Sometimes, not at all. The pillow still held his shape, still smelled like lavender and laundry soap. I'd press my face into it just to pretend a little longer. I missed the sound of him snoring, the shuffle of his feet on the bathroom tile, the way he muttered nonsense in his sleep. One night, I pulled the blanket all the way around me. Not in anger, just in need. I laid there thinking, even the mess of him was something I needed. I missed the way he used to hog the covers, complain about the TV volume, leave socks in odd corners. I missed the parts that used to annoy me. Funny, isn't it? How silence makes you crave even the noise you used to wish away. The garage light glowed through the slats of the blinds, a small, distant reminder that he was close and still completely gone. I was reaching for a jar of nails in the corner cabinet, something I hadn't opened in months. The light from the garage window hit the dust just right, little particles dancing in the air like snowflakes with nowhere to fall. And that's when I saw it, tucked behind the toolbox, wrapped in gold paper with a red bow. Perfume. I froze. Not from the surprise of it, but from the way my hands suddenly forgot what to do. I just stood there, staring. He hadn't given me perfume in years. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The bow was perfectly tied, the wrapping untouched. It looked intentional. I held it gently, like it might break, or burn, or scream. My stomach twisted. My heart didn't race. It slowed, like it was trying to give me time. I placed it back, softly, like setting down something wounded. He never mentioned it. And I never asked, but from that moment on, I started looking differently, watching longer. He smiles at his phone, his garage trips that lasted too long, the way he avoided my eyes when I asked about dinner plans. I told myself I imagined it, but I didn't. I felt the crack form, just a hairline, but it was there, quiet and clear. And once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. I sat on the couch with my tea. The television was on, something light, maybe a sitcom. I don't remember. I wasn't watching. My eyes were on him. He sat across from me, phone in hand, scrolling. Every few seconds, his lips twitched, half a smile, a chuckle. I watched, waiting for him to share. He used to read things out loud. "Listen to this," he'd say. "You'll laugh. But tonight, nothing." "What's funny?" I asked. He looked up, startled almost. "Oh, nothing," he said, quickly, then looked back down. That was it. Oh, nothing. And that little sentence, it was bruised. I felt like a kid not invited to a party she didn't know was happening. Left out. Left behind. The tea had gone cold. I took a sip anyway. The couch creaked as I leaned back. He didn't look up. His screen glowed in the room, brighter than any lamp. I watched the clock tick 1 minute forward, and I wondered, when did I stop being the person he wanted to laugh with? The mirror had started feeling like a stranger. I used to pause there every morning, tucking stray hairs, adjusting my collar, and smiling a little before the day began. But now, I passed it like I didn't want to be seen. That morning, the glass was slightly fogged from the shower steam. The hallway was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater and the soft creak of floorboards under my slippers. Light filtered through the lace curtains, turning everything pale and quiet. I stood there, holding a towel, frozen by my own reflection. My shoulders looked like they'd fallen asleep standing. My lips were tight, like they'd forgotten how to soften. And my eyes had turned into something I didn't recognize. They looked like the weather, like days you don't step outside on. I leaned in just a little, enough to see the lines around my mouth and the places where color had drained. I whispered, barely moving my lips. Where did I go? And the reflection didn't answer. I felt the ache in my chest, not sharp, not screaming, just there, sitting low, quiet, like someone who'd been living there for a long time, waiting for me to notice. I placed my palm flat against the mirror. The glass was cool, even through the steam. I left a small smudge behind when I pulled away. I turned. From it slowly, walking back down the hallway, towel clutched to my chest like armor. That was the day I stopped looking. We were at the grocery store, somewhere between the cereal and the crackers, and he touched the small of my back. Just a light brush, a familiar one. And I flinched, not on the outside. I didn't pull away or gasp, but inside, I felt it. That jolt, that tiny pull of resistance that said, this no longer feels like home. It used to, though. I used to. Lean into that hand. Used to feel safe beneath it, but now it felt borrowed, like something he remembered to do, not something he meant. Do we need eggs? He asked, like everything was fine. I nodded. Probably, I said, but my voice didn't sound like mine. The aisle was quiet, except for the low buzz of the overhead lights. A soft beep came from the checkout lanes. Someone's child laughed from somewhere near the produce. Life happened all around us, while I stood there trying to remember when we'd stopped being a we. He reached past me to grab a box of oatmeal, and I took a small step to the side. Subtle, thoughtless. But I noticed it. I started making excuses, not to shop together. Told him I had errands, or forgot the list, or that I needed time alone. And it wasn't about the groceries. It was about not wanting to walk beside someone who looked like love, but didn't feel like it anymore. We used to hold hands in parking lots. Now I walked ahead without noticing. I remember standing by the dairy section, staring at cartons of milk, thinking, how can two people be so close and still feel so far apart? I don't know what pulled me to the attic that day. It wasn't cold enough to chase a draft, and I didn't need anything stored up there. but something inside me itched. The ladder creaked under my weight. It always had. I remember Harold saying once, "We should fix that thing before you go through it." But we never did. The attic air was dry, still. It smelled like cedar and forgotten linens, like the end of summer in a closed-up room. I stepped over boxes of old decorations, school crafts, things we meant to donate and never did. My fingers trailed along the edge of a shelf as I moved toward the chest, an old cedar box we got as a wedding gift. It sat in the corner, covered in a thin layer of dust. I knelt slowly. My knees ache more than they used to. I lifted the lid, and there it was, my wedding dress, still folded, still white, still soft where the fabric had been preserved, still mine. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just reached for the hem and let my fingers trace the edge like I was learning it all over again. The sunlight cut through the attic vents, painting gold lines across the dust that rose when I lifted the dress. It shimmered gently in the quiet, held it to my chest, and I remembered the girl who wore it, the one who had sewn small blue beads into the lining for luck, the one who had whispered, "Forever," beneath a veil, and believed it, who kissed her new husband like she was sure they'd never drift. I missed her. I missed being her. I stood up slowly, letting the dress fall back into the chest like something too fragile to carry any further. That attic felt like a museum, a place where the old version of me still waited, quiet and still. And for the first time, I let myself ache for her. I held the veil up to the light, just barely. The fabric was delicate, but not fragile. It still held the wildflowers I'd sewn in myself, tiny silk petals stitched with trembling hands. I remember sitting on Mama's porch that summer, the September sun warm on my back, whispering to myself, "He'll always be mine," as I worked the needle through tulle. Harold used to say I was the kind of beautiful that didn't fade. He said it on our wedding night. Said it again 10 years later when I asked if my hips look wider in that blue dress. He grinned, kissed my temple, and said, "Only means more of you to love." The attic light hit the petals just so, casting faint shadows on the cedar boards beneath me. I sat cross-legged, holding that veil like it might still carry the girl I used to be. And maybe it did. Maybe that girl was still in there, tucked in the folds of fabric and stitched between every bead. She believed so deeply in forever, in magic, in the goodness of loving one man fully. I don't know when I started to forget her, but I missed her fiercely at that moment. I held the veil to my heart and closed my eyes. The attic was quiet, except for the hum of memory, and I whispered, "I still love you." Not to Harold, to her. I didn't sob that night. I didn't throw anything or scream into pillows. I simply came undone. I lay in bed, the house too quiet, to ignore. The clock ticked, steady, patient, almost kind. Trees rustled outside the window, a branch tapping the glass now and then, like it was checking to see if I was okay. I wasn't. I stared at the ceiling, one hand over my chest, the other curled under the blanket, my fingers pressed gently, like I was trying to hold something in place, my ribs, my breath, my faith in things returning. Tears came, but not the loud kind. They welled and slid down the sides of my face without asking permission. Soft. Clean. Almost polite. The kind of cry that comes when words fail. I thought about the attic. about the girl in the veil, about the silence at dinner, the way Harold's hand no longer reached for mine, the missed kiss at the door. I felt hollow, not broken, just emptied, like someone had scooped the center out of me and left the shell behind. I listened to the creak of the pipes, the hum of the fridge, the wind lifting and falling again outside the window. I turned onto my side and whispered, "I'm still here," to myself, to the room, maybe to God. The next morning, I folded his socks like I always had, 2 by 2, white, gray, blue. I rolled them neatly and stacked them in a quiet pile. My hands moved like they remembered what my heart was still trying to forget. His shirts were still warm, from the dryer. They smelled like detergent and something faintly familiar, like the version of us that used to share jokes in the closet while getting dressed. I smoothed each sleeve carefully, and then I stopped. I looked down at the folded stack and I asked myself, why am I still folding love that's never folded back? I didn't say it out loud. I just thought about it. But once I did, I couldn't unthink it. I sat on the edge of the laundry bench and held one of his shirts. Just hold it. Let the cotton fall over my knees. The window let in soft light that striped across the floor. The air smelled like warm fabric and fresh cotton. I looked at that stack, shirts I'd folded, washed, and folded again, and I thought about how long it had been since he thanked me, since he noticed. My chest tightened, not with anger, with truth. I wasn't folding shirts. I was holding a story that no longer included me, and I realized that sometimes love doesn't leave in a fight. Sometimes it just forgets to notice the woman still pairing the socks. The card slid through the mail slot with the softest click. I almost missed it. Might have if I hadn't been standing right there, buttering my toast. The slice rested on the counter, half smeared, the knife still in my hand when I heard that gentle sound, like the house exhaling. I turned, walked to the door, and picked it up off the floor. It was a small envelope, child-sized and wrinkled a bit at the corners. No return address, just my name. Miss Ellen, in big round letters that wobbled with the kind of effort only a 5-year-old can give. I smiled, just a little. The scent of toast and ink floated up as I opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of construction paper, the edges curling slightly. A drawing. Stick figures, 3 of them, holding hands beneath a sun the size of the whole sky. The sun was too big for the paper. It stretched past the top edge like it didn't care about boundaries. Bright yellow scribbles radiated from it in every direction, and beneath it, there we were. 1 tall figure, 2 small ones. Me and June, I guessed, and probably her doll. Held that crooked sun in both hands like it was made of glass. Like it might break if I breathed too hard. I stood in the quiet of my kitchen. Soft spring light coming through the window, shadows stretching across the floor. The house smelled of toast and something older. Maybe the paper, maybe the air. I looked at the drawing again, and I felt warm. Like something inside me had been waiting for that envelope without knowing it. I sat at the kitchen table, the drawing open in front of me, the card resting beside my half-empty cup of tea. The mug was cold now, and I had forgotten the moment that little son entered the room. There were just 3 words beneath the stick figures. Don't be sad. The handwriting trembled with effort, the letters dancing across the bottom of the page. But the message? Steady, simple, direct, don't be sad. I traced the edge of each word with my finger, slowly, gently, like they might lift off the page and vanish if I moved too fast. The tears came quietly, not the kind that hurts, but the kind that heals, the kind that slips down your cheeks like rain sliding down a clean window. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone offered me comfort without asking for anything in return. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the birds outside, just chirping, simple, clear, like the world had decided to start speaking softly again. The storm had passed. I hadn't noticed until that moment. June's words were small, but they landed deeper than anything Harold ever said, deeper than the silence he left in his place. I looked at the drawing again and whispered, "Thank you, baby." And I meant it. I pressed the card to my chest, right over my heart, and something inside me gave way. It didn't break, it didn't crack, it just opened, like my ribs had been clenched for weeks, holding breath I didn't even know I was carrying. I closed my eyes and sat back, letting the kitchen chair catch the full weight of me. It wasn't peace that settled in, but it was the beginning of it. Like a door cracked open just enough to let warm air drift in. The light in the kitchen was soft, golden, the kind that wraps itself around you without asking, the kind that makes even the dust in the air look beautiful. I inhaled slowly. The scent of old paper, pencil wax, and a little lavender cleaner clung to the room. Familiar, undemanding, safe. I felt tears prick again, but they didn't fall. They just stayed there, sitting at the edge of everything. I opened my eyes and looked at the card again, still pressed gently to my chest. I thought of June. I thought of her small hands and her big son and the way children know what grown-ups forget. I thought, this is what healing looks like. Not fireworks, not declarations, just quiet and enough. For the first time in a long while, I walked to the mirror without hesitation. The bathroom was warm from the morning shower. Steam clung to the edges of the mirror like soft fog that didn't want to leave. I stood in front of it and waited. Let myself see me. Really see me. There were lines around my eyes I hadn't noticed before. My hair had grayed more than I remembered. My lips were softer at the corners, less pressed, less hidden. I picked up the brush and ran it through my hair slowly. Each stroke was steady. No rush, no self-judgment, just care. The brush made a soft sound, almost a whisper, as it moved through the strands. I watched my reflection, not in critique, but in quiet recognition. This is what rising looks like, I whispered. No trumpets, no music, just bristles, breath, and a woman choosing herself again. I set the brush down and opened the cabinet, smoothed a bit of rose lotion into my palms, and pressed it into my cheeks. Not for anyone else, just for the skin that had waited so patiently to be touched kindly. The mirror caught the sunlight as it shifted, wrapping the bathroom in a soft glow. I looked into my own eyes and saw something I thought I'd misplaced. Me. I didn't bake banana bread for Harold. I didn't even bake it for company. I baked it for the house. For the walls that hadn't smelled like sweetness in too long. For the way the scent of cinnamon and banana climbs the staircase like an old memory looking for a place to sit. I tied my apron, the one with the yellow stitching along the edges. I cracked the eggs into the bowl, mashed the ripe bananas with the back of a spoon, and let the flour puff into the air like dust dancing in sunlight. The batter was thick and golden, clinging to the sides of the bowl like it had something to say. I poured it slowly into the pan. The oven ticked softly behind me, counting the minutes. As it preheated, light streamed through the open curtains, warming the countertop. The kitchen felt alive again, not busy, just full. I wiped my hands on the apron and stood still for a second. Just breathing, just smelling, just being here. I thought of June, of the card, of her sun that had stretched past the edges of the page, and I smiled. As the first scent of baking rose into the air, sweet, warm, familiar, I thought, this is what coming back to life smells like. He stood in the hallway, still, quiet, like a photo that hadn't been taken yet. I saw him before he saw me, but I didn't shrink, didn't pause. I kept walking. My bare feet are soft on the hardwood floor. My shoulders are square. My head is up. He looked up just as I passed, but I didn't lower my eyes, not out of pride, not out of spite, just because I didn't need to anymore. I smelled the banana bread trailing behind me, the air still warm from it, and I thought, that smell is mine, that moment is mine, that peace is mine. He didn't say anything, neither did I. But I didn't flinch. I didn't disappear, and that, to me, was louder than any goodbye. The restaurant was dim, quiet in that upscale kind of way. Voices hushed, silverware clinking like wind chimes in slow motion. We were seated at a corner table beneath a low-hanging light that turned everything amber. The tablecloth was starched crisp, the silver polished like no one had ever used it before. He smiled politely when we sat. So did I. That was the nature of it now. Polite smiles, polite greetings, polite everything. The menu offered steak with rosemary butter and something fancy with lentils I knew I wouldn't order. I didn't need the menu. I knew what I'd get, just like I knew what he'd get. Some habits don't need words. He ordered the steak. I ordered the fish. 47 years, he said, glancing at the candle. We should mark the time somehow. I nodded, folding my hands in my lap beneath the table. We are, I said. We talked about the boys, about how our oldest was considering a second retirement, about the neighbor's new mailbox, which was apparently too modern for the neighborhood's taste. We even laughed once when the waiter mispronounced something on the wine list. It was easy, too easy. The water glasses clinked louder than his voice. Every sound in the room stood out sharper than his words. The scrape of a knife on a plate, the pop of a cork across the dining room. Strangers were laughing nearby. Real laughter, bright, unrehearsed. I looked at Harold and realized ours had been rehearsed for a while now. The butter on the rolls softened as the minutes passed. I broke mine in half and placed one side on his plate, like I used to. He didn't notice. I looked at the flame between us, small, contained, still burning, but not warming anything anymore. He reached for his wine glass and took a sip, swirling it once before setting it down. Then, just as casually, he reached for his left hand. There was no hesitation, no glance. He twisted the ring free and set it down beside the salt shaker like it was nothing more than a breadcrumb. No ceremony, just a clean break from something that once carried vows. I stared. The ring caught the candlelight briefly, just long enough to shine once before settling. It looked small, exposed, forgotten. I didn't speak, didn't gasp, just watched. He shifted in his seat, like the act hadn't just changed the entire room. He picked up his fork again, cut into his steak, and chewed quietly. My fish sat untouched. Looked at his hand, bare now. And I remembered how it used to feel pressed to my back, how it used to squeeze mine when we crossed the street, how it used to reach for me in the dark. Now it reached for steak. Something shifted in me, right then, like a painting tilting ever so slightly on the wall, not enough to fall, but enough that you noticed every time you looked. What does that mean? My voice came out quieter than I expected. Like I didn't want the other tables to hear. Like, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer either. He looked up slowly, fork paused mid-air. His lips parted, then closed again. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked past me, at the candle, the tablecloth, the wall behind my head. Anywhere but into my eyes. I don't know, he said eventually. I don't know who we are anymore. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I'd heard that tone before. The one people use when they've already made up their mind. I placed my napkin on the table, folded neatly. My hand didn't shake. I stared at him for a long moment. "You're not going to explain?" I asked. He shrugged. "There's nothing to explain." My chest didn't tighten. My throat didn't close. I didn't feel the rush of tears the way I once might have. Instead, I felt distant, not cold, not hot. Just empty. Like an old room, someone moved out quietly, and in that emptiness, something in me stood up. Not my body, not yet, but some old part of me, some versions I'd put away. She stood and waited. His words hung in the air like steam, already, fading. But mine came out clear, solid. I just remembered exactly who I am. He blinked, said nothing, didn't reach for me, didn't protest, and that told me everything I needed to know. I picked up my purse, tucked my chair in, and stood, with a slow grace that came from somewhere deeper than pride. It came from a place that had finally stopped waiting to be claimed. I placed my napkin gently on the plate, smoothed it with 2 fingers, like I was finishing something. And maybe I was. I walked to the exit with my head high. No drama, no glance back. The restaurant was quiet. Some couples are still eating. One man was laughing too loudly near the bar. But around me, it felt like the world had slowed. Outside, the moon was waiting, soft, honest, unafraid. I opened the door and stepped into the cool breeze, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Not because I was leaving him, but because I had finally come back to myself. The next morning, I made coffee like I always did. Measured out the grounds. Waited for the drip. Let the aroma fill the kitchen until it feels like home again. I stood barefoot on the kitchen tiles, sun warming the tops of my feet. The lawyer's number was still on the fridge. I took it down, sat at the table, and dialed. He answered quickly, friendly, casual. I got straight to the point. "I need to update my will," I said. There was a pause on the line. "Yes, of course, Mrs. Wren. What changes?" "Remove his name." Another pause. "Are you sure?" I smiled softly. "I'm certain." I didn't need to explain. Not to him. Not to anyone. It wasn't anger. It was clear, like wiping a foggy window and finally seeing what's beyond. And for the first time in months, I saw my future again. I sat at my writing desk later that week, the soft morning light stretching across the table like a whisper. I folded the recipe carefully, my banana bread, written in my own hand, creases smoothed from years of use. Beside it, I placed the note. Dear June, thank you for your sunshine when I had none. This is the recipe. But the real secret is to always leave some batter in the bowl to taste. I sealed it with a small sticker of a sunflower and tucked it into the envelope. Beside it, a fresh loaf cooled on the counter. I thought about Harold, about the years, and I felt peace, not because I erased him, but because I left something better behind. Love doesn't always go where you plant it, but sometimes it finds fertile ground anyway. Thank you for sitting with me through this little window into my heart. If you're over 50, drop your age and where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's out there listening. And if these old bones still have stories worth sharing, subscribe for more of Grandma's Tales.